Welcome back, loyal listeners. This is Seth Abramovitch, senior writer at The Hollywood Reporter.
And I'm Chip Pope, and I love you. The audience and Seth. Yeah.
Hard to believe, but we're at the end of our first season of It Happened in Hollywood. This has been an amazing journey through the wormhole of time into some of the most memorable moments in at least my Hollywood history.
Well, yeah, like your David Lynch trips that you went on.
We wanted to go out with a bang for the last episode of our first season. And what bigger bang than a punk rock, transsexual, East German, botched sex change,
flippy wigged.
Oh, yeah.
With like
Call back to Farrah Fawcett.
Paper, toilet paper rollers in the hair to make the curls.
Trailer park trash.
Animated interludes.
Mythology. If you haven't figured out what it is by now, then you probably aren't a fan. But if you are a fan, you are in for a real treat. And that's what's up today on
It Happened in Hollywood.
Love that theme. That's our own rock anthem by the boys from Cynic, Paul Masvidal and Sean Malone. And shout out to Paul, who has a solo album coming out. It's actually 3 albums, so look for that.
Whoa, that's
online.
Ambitious.
He's a genius.
Speaking of ambition, our guest this week.
Our guest is none other than John Cameron Mitchell. They have run out of hyphenates for what this guy can do.
Yeah, exactly.
He started as a professional actor working in LA and in New York theater. And as he's going to tell us today, he had cravings to do something more and to create something that actually meant something. That led to his masterwork, Hedwig and the Angry Inch.
Amazing.
And he's still hot at it. You know, after Hedwig, which he starred in, wrote, directed, you know, it was a off-Broadway show. Then it became a Killer Films feature.
Went to Broadway.
Oh, and then it went to Broadway.
So crazy.
They brought it
back. What
back.
a long road to Broadway.
With Neil Patrick Harris playing the part of Hedwig, but he stepped in as well.
Taye Diggs was Hedwig. Who else?
Yeah, and as he's going to tell us today, you know, Hedwig is not one person, and it's not even a real person. It's an idea. It's a metaphor, he says. And anyone and anything can play Hedwig, including Meryl Streep, who politely turned him down. Let's get into it, because I love him. He's a genius. He can just talk as if he's reading out of his memoirs, but he's just talking to you like
it's truly amazing.
A normal person. And
a raconteur.
And he has a new scripted podcast, a fictional podcast that's sort of a sequel to Hedwig, and we'll get into that in the show as well. But I'm too excited about this episode. Let's start with maybe somewhere in the 90s. He's been on Broadway. He's kind of, you know, feeling listless, empty. Something is not feeding his soul.
Around 94, I really wanted to make something that was different. I wasn't seeing my world. AIDS was reaching a frenzied peak in the early 90s. A couple of plays were dealing with it, but, you know, certainly musicals were not. I mean, falsettos a little bit, but it was not, I didn't feel like I was seeing the things that moved me on stage in terms of amazing drag performers, rock and roll, stand-up even, performance art, but using the structure of a Broadway show. So Stephen and I combined all those elements into something that was very doable because it was me in a band with a backup singer, and we could do it anywhere. But we were shooting for off-Broadway. It took us about 4 years.
So he's talking about Stephen Trask, who wrote the music for Hedwig.
Yeah, and I had never heard of Stephen Trask before Hedwig. Had you?
I feel like I heard his name, you know, mentioned in those kind of New York 90s, early 90s circles with like Girls Against Boys and what other bands like that in the early 90s. But so
he was sort of around on the scene, but somehow with his soundtrack for Hedwig, he just knocked it out of the park. Every song was a very catchy rock anthem.
And a real rock and roll song that, you know, you could put it up next to most of those classic kind of 70s type songs. Lou Reed, David Bowie.
Now, I just assumed they had met in the scene somewhere, but there was actually an interesting story of how they met. It seems like so many creative unions happen in airplanes. There must be something up there.
I met Stephen on a plane. He was actually reading scripts for New Line, and I had just finished Book of Love and had also done Freddy's Nightmares, I think, which was the Nightmare on Elm Street TV show that they did. And his manager had written the story to my episode. It's with all these weird things in common. Mike DeLuca was involved with that, and now he was the head of production at New Line. So he was reading a Fassbinder book. It was like a perfect thing. And we were avoiding the movie, which was When Harry Met Sally, which I still hadn't seen, and started talking. And then we bumped into each other over for the next couple of years randomly. And then when I was looking for a composer, I went to see his band Cheater at CBGB's, and he went to see me in a musical called Hello Again at Lincoln Center, and we both agreed we should work together. So I started telling him stories about my life, and the character of Hedwig, which was really Helga in my life. It was a babysitter for my brother, who was also a prostitute in Kansas.
Did you know that Hedwig was his brother's prostitute babysitter named Helga?
No, I did not know that. I mean, that seems like a real obscure one. That even people who, you could watch the whole movie and not think, well, I bet that character is based off of a babysitter.
Now, Helga did not have an angry inch. That was a flight of artistic fantasy, but she sounded like quite a woman. Let's learn a little bit more about Helga, the prostitute babysitter.
Which also sounds like a New Line movie from the time.
Helga was moonlighting and had a lot of dates. And me and my friend Brenda would go over to her trailer, and she had a different date every night. She never knew what they were going to look like, and she was not that good looking, but she was so popular, and all these guys, and they'd come up the driveway, and we'd have to go out. Brenda and I would go out the back. She would just kick us out, but if she didn't like the look of the guy, she'd go out the back too with us. And it was only later Brenda reminded me. I was like, oh my God, she was working a lot of angles. And she was a kind of model for a character. She was a woman, bio woman, but then when Trask and I were hanging out at Squeezebox, which was the punk rock drag club of the 90s, that was the party I'd always dreamed of, where you could, mosh with the cute boys, and it was, the agenda was on the surface instead of underneath. It was heaven. And Stephen was the leader of the house band that would accompany various drag queens on punk rock covers. And his bass player, Jack, eventually became my boyfriend. So from 94 on, we developed it in clubs. We wanted to keep it out of theaters because a lot of things that were so-called rock musicals were pretty tame because they were theater-based. And we wanted the band on stage and a real assault. I appreciate Rent for what it's done for the world, but it wasn't very rock and roll. It wasn't what it said it was. Kids in the East Village making music. That's not the music they would be making.
Right. It's very Disney-fied.
Yeah, they wouldn't be wearing those clothes. But it was about, real things that were happening.
So Squeezebox, I was actually living in New York at this time in the late 90s, and it was actually really cool. It was on the west side, like towards the water, and you never knew who you were going to see there. You could see like Courtney Love one night or Drew Barrymore another night. I remember one night I was dancing on the dance floor, and I came face to face with Boy George.
Whoa.
And he had just been on Oprah, and she had some sort of like anti-gay Christians on, and he told them off.
Oh, nice.
And I totally cheered him on, and I think I freaked him out a little, but it was that kind of place where you could just rub shoulders with all kinds of rock stars and Debbie Harry, and it made the gay scene seem really punk rock and cool, and not the sort of homogenized sort of dance music stuff that you were hearing in other neighborhoods like Chelsea.
Yeah, you mean like West Hollywood right now for the past 15 years?
For the past 2,000, 500 years, the same beat has been pounding out of West Hollywood.
Ooh, yeah!
So anyway, I was on the fringes of this world watching a doe-eyed 20-something Now, at the time, I remember there was this trans punk rock crazy artist named Jane County that would perform there. And I remembered that there was some sort of controversy that Jane County was saying that Hedwig was based on her and she didn't get any cut of the profits and she was once again taken advantage of. And so I
Let's find out why.
developed a stammer. But no, I couldn't help but, ask if there was any truth to that. I know Jane County was performing there
At
and
Squeezebox.
at Squeezebox.
Later
Was she
on.
an inspiration? And did she complain later that she felt she was? And
I think she's had a hard life, and when we started Squeezebox, she came later after Hedwig was already starting. But I'd certainly heard of her and had her Maxis at Kansas City album where she was the DJ and did If You Don't Want to Fuck Me, Fuck Off. And, she was great. She was more like New York Dollsy than, but with a punk spirit. But she's a trans person making rock and roll, which was the only similarity. I mean, though I actually have never thought of Hedwig as trans because it was a boy who was quite comfortable in his gender and as a gay man and is coerced into a mutilation, really, by her boyfriend, her mother, and really by the patriarchy, if you think about it, or the binarchy that says you have to be one or the other for certain things to happen and people to get married and get it. It's all the same bullshit, but it's not really a trans story. It's like not a trans statement to me. Certainly there's gender cross, there's all kinds of gender fluidity and exploration, but I don't think of it as by the trans story because you sort of to be trans, you want to be.
Right, right.
You choose to be or identify yourself as.
Yeah, so from Wayne County to Jane County, definitely.
Yeah. And she's from Georgia, I think Georgia, but, there was not really much in common. But she did get mad. Yeah, she was like, I guess there wasn't room for two blondes on stage.
Right. Right.
Later, she apologized.
You bring up an interesting thing, which is that, when it came back to Broadway and it had a whole resurgence, in that period, the whole trans movement happened. And I wondered, did the trans community now embrace this as their story? And did they interpret it in such a way that they feel a trans actor should be playing Hedwig? Or
no one has said that to me, but I've heard that, come up. The thing is, at Squeezebox, which was a drag club, and drag and trans have interactions, intersections. They're two different things. Love and sex are two different things. Sometimes you have both at the same time.
I had that once.
Yeah. And as you know, drag is performance. It's a show. Trans is your life. It's your identity. It's how you live. And you might be a performer who also, prefers to be female identified if you were born a boy. And I would see people at the show who were at Squeezebox that were trans, and some were drag queens. And probably if they came up now, they would call themselves non-binary. I probably would too, if I was 17 right now, just to loosen things up. And I admire that. I admire the people who are not trapped in the binarchy, because that's what society tells you is you can only be one or another. When we're really all on a continuum, and male and female, what that means changes too. So the terms I find not particularly useful, male and female, because we're always in the middle. And Hansel/Hedwig is very much a gender of one because of this forced sex reassignment. And she, at the very beginning of the show, says, "I'm the wall. Try and tear me down. But I am not you or you. I'm not east or west. I'm not man or woman. I'm not top or bottom. I am the wall," which can also be a bridge if you look at it the right way. She says, there's not much of a difference between a bridge or a wall. Without me in the middle, you would be nothing at all.
You must remember one thing! Hey. Ain't much of a difference between a bridge and a wall. Without me right in the middle there, wow, we're nothing at all. An amazing adversary, trying to tear me down. You want me, baby, I dare
He almost started singing the song there.
I got really excited when those lyrics started, kind of like goosebumps.
Right? Did you think he was going to stand up and just tear into it?
Get on the table and just go for it.
Put on his wig?
Beto style.
Get your feet off that table. We're trying to eat, Beto.
Maybe this is a good moment for those who are not familiar with Hedwig to sort of quickly explain what the concept here of the show is.
Pitch it to me. I pretend I'm a network executive somewhere.
Okay, so it starts in East Germany when the wall is still up.
You lost me. Keep going. Could you imagine? Keep going.
And he's the son of a serviceman, isn't he? An American serviceman and a German
who never seems to be at home.
Mother. And the serviceman just takes off on them, and the mother raises him, and he
discovers he can sing to himself by putting his head in the oven. Right?
Yeah, he hangs out in the oven, he naps there, and that's his sort of playroom. One day he's lying, sunning himself, and a American serviceman...
Face down, right?
Face down, so yeah, you can't really tell what sex he is, and he's very kind of young and girly looking. And American serviceman sees him and plies him with all kinds of candies, and basically they start a affair. And then the mother sees this serviceman as, his name is Hansel at that point, a ticket back to the U.S., and the serviceman says, well, you know, they're going to examine him, so we should really give him a sex change. And the mother, for some reason, goes along with this. And they do, but they go to some scary back alley doctor, and
of course.
He botches it. And instead of giving him sort of a surgical vagina, he gives him a angry inch, a 1-inch mound of flesh, where his penis used to be, where his vagina never was.
Well, I'm an executive. I'll buy this. I feel like it's a summer franchise. It actually does have kind of an epic backstory.
Well, that's the backstory. But then he develops a band, and he becomes an angry punk rocker, and he meets a very cute sort of up-and-coming pop singer.
And the pop singer steals all his songs.
And then the pop singer steals all his songs, goes on, becomes a huge arena-selling megastar, and Hedwig goes and follows him around from show to show, performing in little restaurants and dives and things like that. But what was so cool to hear from John is, you know, his interpretation of what Hedwig is. And it's not a rock star. It's not a star vehicle. To him, it's a concept. It's an idea. Mm-hmm. And it's a very personal one to him.
By having a Hedwig, it's like that thing, if there was no God, we'd have to invent it. If there was no Hedwig, we have to invent it. And we do. I did. You know, because there isn't one. But the metaphor of it, the metaphor of someone caught in the middle, is how a lot of people feel. You know, not knowing who they are, being treated a certain way, being swindled, being stolen from, being raped and mutilated. Even if you haven't been raped and mutilated, a lot of people who have nothing to do with Hedwig's story relate to it, and that is a great gift. And that can be trans people. And that can be straight people. It can be drag performers. It can be, you know, I've had all kinds of people say, thank you for giving me a space in which I can be myself. Not to imitate you and not to do just what you did, but to empower me. If that can happen and that can be kind and also in your face and challenging and ultimately humane and empathetic, then I can make something like that. I'm freed to do that. So many trans people have thanked me, and I'm moved by that because I'm not trans. You know, it's like that is the point of art, is that we go somewhere with our imagination and find these things in common with people you didn't think you had, and enable them to do their thing. That's the best. Comfort as well. Escapism is important, but to me, all of my stuff has to be useful to me and to my viewers, and that's why it's hard to do just whatever, things that have no depth. I was overjoyed to understand that people understood that Hedwig is a metaphor, a very specific one, just as Jesus is a metaphor. Who the hell knows what happened with Jesus? But once in a while you read something and go, oh, that's,
I love his work.
I love his work, as it says. Like, this is a great, who would say turn the other cheek? That has never happened in the history of religious leaders to turn the other cheek. Maybe Buddha. But, it's a metaphor. The Bible's a metaphor. Hedwig's a metaphor. It's all useful if you make it useful.
It's also like entertaining, though, the way that you do it, because something like Hedwig is also very entertaining, very funny, and it never seems preachy. And it is like a painting in a way where you get what you get out of it. So your point of view that you bring to it is also something that's as important to me as the finished product.
Yeah. And it can mean different things at different times in your life. My favorite things are ones I can revisit. We all know things that we love, but you don't want to see it again. And you may be even moved, but you sense that it's not necessarily going to be another experience next time or a better experience next time. You got it all. Maybe it was a simple story. I prefer denser things that can be revisited and go, oh, I never thought of that, or, something like this. But it has to go down easy with the spoonful of sugar, which is the music and the comedy and the design, the jokes, Sense of humor will reduce our superego judging side. It just sort of deactivates it so things can get in. When you laugh, you drop the judge, which is why I like to go from a laugh to something that might make you cry, in the next beat. Because that happens in life. It really does. I mean, we all have cracked up in the middle of a funeral, and it is funny, and it is tragic, and that's life. Life is not a genre.
Hedwig loves plays on words. Are you a fan of plays on words?
Of course. Of course. My mom is Scottish. I grew up with British humor and culture, and it's very word-based, British. And even the working class people relish good wordplay in boulevard entertainment in the UK. Americans are more suspicious of words and tend to be more literal. And, Europeans understand metaphor. Maybe they've been around longer. But I love the British sense of humor. It can be quite dark and mean, too. But, when I did Hedwig on Broadway, I ripped my knee out on stage. And at first I was like, oh, God, how am I going to, I have another 3 months. But then the next moment was like, oh, I have all kinds of lines I can now write to explain this knee. And I had a bedazzled leg brace, for the next 3 months, and talked about being kneecapped outside the dress barn by someone in a Sting mask because he was playing across the street. The Broadway rivalries, and I was like, I had no idea that Sting was still considered a person of interest. And the audience was seeing the show with the original cast. So
there you go.
To me, wherever, squeeze as many jokes in as possible.
And then the music is that's what keeps bringing me back.
Yeah.
It never gets old.
Stephen Trask's classic score. And, someone who hadn't really he'd made a musical film and stuff, but he hadn't really used those powers, that he had been building up. And eclectic interests I'm more the Bowie guy, he was more the Lou Reed and John Lennon guy, and, between us, we found this, glam-inflected classic rock score, really.
Yeah. What was the first song or the first one where you thought, oh, wow, we've cracked it?
The first one was in some ways the best one, which was The Origin of Love. I had seen a production of stage adaptation of Plato's Symposium in L.A. in the 80s, directed by David Schweitzer. And the Symposium really is a Platonic dialogue of a bunch of homos after, like a post-Tony's party. It's after the Theater Awards party, talking about love, gossiping about love. And they each have to give a speech in honor of man-on-man love. And Aristophanes tells the story of the origin of love, how we were cut in half by the gods, and we are consistently seeking our other half, and that is love. And that just really moved me, and felt like a myth written by a person rather than a religion. It was about love, of course. And in opposition to the gods, it was almost like the first deist tract, or almost atheist. It was like, I'm not going to believe in these people these gods that are afraid of us. When we were whole, we were more powerful than the gods. And so love as a power thing was very much in the stories. Immortality and power, and even the sacred band of Thebes in the piece is described as a famous military unit made up of male lovers who were the fiercest in all of Greece. And when Alexander the Great defeated them, the sacred band of Thebes, he wept because it was these lovers, and Alexander was famously had his own male lovers. So that was the center of it. And I gave this text of that story to Stephen, and he came back with a song word for word and note for note, and it was just amazing. So I was like, this is our beginning.
And then fire shot down from the sky in bolts like shining blades of the night. And it ripped right through the flesh of the children of the sun and the moon and the earth. And some Indian god threw the wound up to a hole for the ram to a belly to remind us the price we paid.
Wicked Little Town was the next one.
What town is the wicked little town to you?
It's Junction City, Kansas, where Hedwig lived and I lived. And
how long did you live there?
Just 3 years, but it was a very, salient years. There was a lot went on. I pubesced. My brother died. My mother went in a little bit insane, and I met Helga. I mean, it was a lot went on. I felt like I became a person there, and it's also the setting of my new musical anthem.
And some of the things you just said are dramatized in Anthem.
Yes, Anthem, which is really my alternative autobiography, musical podcast series that's out now on a new app called Luminary, podcast app called Luminary.
So something about these 3 years have created or have produced a big slice of
I
your
think we all
creativity.
have. I mean, I moved a lot as an Army brat, but there was something about that time that was most powerful. I mean, I've thrown in some other stuff from being in Albuquerque in high school, but, writers go back to, many writers write about the same place, Faulkner, and everyone goes back to that time that was the most important time and that place and keep writing about it. And I've lived a lot of places, but there's something about Junction City, which was a very different kind of town. It was a small town near an Army base, which are different from other small towns because they tend to be more racially diverse because of the military. They tend to have more crime because the soldiers, need to be serviced with drugs and prostitutes. But there's a weird live and let live thing about it, too, because of the diversity. And my school was very racially mixed, and I didn't really understand the problem of other places, that had problems with someone from somewhere else, because the Army everyone was from somewhere else. And to me, that was America.
So it's crazy how much of his work has come out of that 3 years.
Yeah, almost makes me want to take a pilgrimage to this Junction City, Kansas, and see what's going on over there.
Well, it doesn't seem like a hub airport. I don't know if there's a lot of flights direct to Junction City. It's just interesting. The saying, you leave your hometown, but it never leaves you. I think that's important for his career.
And I think it's remarkable that he's had, all this success in, the media capitals, New York, Los Angeles, but he never tries to escape where he came from. And on the contrary, he uses that to create his art. And in some ways, I would say he's a great American artist, writer, author, performer. And I don't think he ever really gets thought of that way. He gets put in the punk rock Hedwig Alterna box, but there's something a lot deeper going on about American values with his work.
Will Rogers in drag.
And an angry inch.
Yes. You'd be angry too.
He's fascinating to me because the way I saw him and still see him is a huge success, and he's gone on to direct films with Nicole Kidman, and, he's had a varied career, and, now he's on this show Shrill that we both love on Hulu.
Yeah, great show.
And he was on Girls, always at the epicenter of whatever the hip, cool thing is. He shows up and adds another, luster of authenticity and coolness to it.
Right. But he's clearly not chasing any kind of coolness or trying to be cool. He's just this guy following his muse.
Yeah. In talking to him, it was interesting. These are all very conscious decisions on his part. And every person's career is different in show business. And you do what feels right at the time. And he had a pretty strong moral compass as far as after his big breakthrough, quote unquote, which he kind of plays down with Hedwig, what he was going to do next. And it was really interesting to hear how he guided himself through that and the advice he took and chose to disregard or chose to take.
If you do something different, you make less money. That's fine. And you get more satisfaction. I never like to be told what to do as an actor, as a gay person, as a man, as a whatever. I did, in fact, will do the opposite, but not just to shock or be contrarian, but to, I had some good mentors, who said, Hollywood will fuck you up. So be skeptical.
Who told you that?
I got that from Barry Miller, I did a film with in college, an American Playhouse piece. Barry Miller, who starred in Fame and The Chosen and Saturday Night Fever, was very punk rock, and he grew up in the business. So people who do tend to be more skeptical of it. His mother, I think, was a famous something in the business. But he had a real do what you need to do, and but say no. Sometimes there's a great power in saying no if it feels wrong. I also had Bruce Norris, who was at school with me, and he quit a sitcom, which was unheard of, and was never going to work again. And he was like, fuck it, I don't give a shit. And then he went on to win the Pulitzer for Clybourne Park and then quit the Corrections. We did it again. It's like, how can he quit? And Meshack Taylor I was in my first play, Huckleberry Finn. Meshack took care of me. And so I had people who were always like, and great teachers like Frank Galati and Bud Byer at Northwestern, who were stepping with people, and they were doing, adapting Nabokov and Beckett. And it was like, the world is your oyster artistically. You're not necessarily going to be artistically, satisfied as an actor in Hollywood or maybe even on Broadway. And so you have to make your thing, and you pay the bills, and then you do your thing. So I always had that. So I never felt trapped anywhere. And if something was accidentally well known, I knew that things come and go. Hedwig was, I was nominated for a Golden Globe, and it was a hoot to go, but it was fun because I could leave.
Right.
I could enjoy it, laugh, and leave. And a lot of other people there felt like they were in high school and they had to do the right thing, and they were trapped. And I was like, bye. So I did enjoy being the populist outsider. I still want the work to be accessible. I want it to always have something you can be challenged by. And I also know that the more money you get, the more trouble it's going to be. Mm-hmm. They pay you in order to fuck you up. That's the deal. The more money you get, the more stupid things will happen. And sometimes you got to make that money, and you got mouths to feed and family and such. And my mom has Alzheimer's and needs a lot of money. So in the last few years, I went full force to make money, which I hadn't had to do because I have cheap rent in New York. But then I was like, okay, I think I have to be a regular in a TV show again, which I hadn't done in 20 years. So I was like, I'm available, hoping someone cared. And then instantly I got Shrill, which was a great job.
Right.
Great
That's
part.
still a good
Yeah,
show.
great
Right. It's
people.
not like a piece of crap.
No,
it is
it's
about something.
great.
And
and it's like 2 months out of the year with nice people, and they let me rewrite some of my lines, and it's all good. Lena Dunham pulled me out of retirement, to do Girls. Mm-hmm. So I'd been doing a little acting, and it's been fun. But I did quit for 15 years after Hedwig because I was like, I don't want to be just an actor again. I was writing and directing.
I'm curious about that shift. So Hedwig becomes a sensation off Broadway.
Yeah.
You'd already been on Broadway.
Non-lucrative sensation.
Non-lucrative, but it definitely made you a name.
Shaking things up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you represent a certain kind of counterculture figure who's still commercial somehow.
Barely.
but it was a hit. Like people were talking about it. I went with my mom. I'll never forget on Halloween.
It was more of a success d'estime, which is French for, yeah, but can you eat it?
Right.
But it didn't have everyone on Broadway trying to get you in their Broadway show after that?
No, because they always want you to do what you just did. So the offers I would get would be like, I have another German role. Right? It's called the MC in Cabaret, and I'm like, no, which is great, but it's to them it's the same thing. Or
Right.
I was offered an X-Man role
Oh my God.
because they had a German accent, but I didn't really want to. I was tired. And I
Like
was
young Magneto or something?
It was a Nightcrawler actually,
Wow, really?
but who was actually my favorite X-Men as a kid, but I was tired. I quit acting, and I just saw a lot of makeup being put on. For 5 hours.
Sit in a chair for 4
Yeah.
hours.
It was to Alan Cumming.
And then you're like,
Yes, and he did a great job. I think he didn't have a very good time, he told me. But it was, I had just did what Barry Miller and Meshack Teller told me, go follow your heart, And making Hedwig was following my heart. It certainly wasn't a career move, because many people were like, what are you doing, drag? And, it's very low class, and, punk rock is not going to sell. And, it's funny, even your most avant-garde friends are like, well, is that really going to sell? I'm like, what are you talking about? You're the guy who does atonal,
Right.
Everyone's a fucking,
Right.
everyone's got resting pitch face now. So we made it for love, and we made it for our friends. And it was a shock when, people wanted to make it as a film. It was a musical for people who didn't like musicals too. So the regular audiences were often silent, like not laughing at all. But then we would get, rock stars in and interesting people, and Bowie and Lou Reed, and they loved it.
This was at the live shows?
This was off Broadway, yeah.
Yeah, he plays it down, but this thing was the toast of New York for a while. And some crazy names were coming to check out the show. Names like David Bowie, who the show probably owes
Heard of him.
more of a, of its stylistic DNA to than any other artist, but as well as Lou Reed, probably owes the other half of its stylistic DNA to Lou Reed.
Yeah.
And then a bunch of other super rando celebrities. And it was really fun to hear him talk about greeting these people backstage. So here's John talking about David Bowie's reaction to the show. I just can't imagine meeting Bowie face to face and having to hear what he thought of your glam rock opera.
hello, John.
I didn't know he was there, thank God. I met him later, and he put money into our LA production, actually. And he said, you got it right. You got it right. I was like, oh my God.
Wow.
And
Did he come backstage?
He didn't. I met him later. My boyfriend worked at a studio where he would rehearse, so I met him there.
Wow.
But Lou Reed did come up and, said that was beautiful, and that was very powerful. And, a lot of our heroes. And it was a great cross-section. It would be like one night would be, B. Arthur and Gallagher, or Marilyn Manson and Barry Manilow, not together. But they would all, it would be this mixture, Patti LuPone and the guy who sings "You Spin Me Right Round, Baby, Right Round."
Pete Burns.
Pete Burns.
R.I.P.
And it was just actually the Bowie night. Actually, by accident, Jane County
Oh, wow.
came, and she came upstairs, and she was, I think, thrown by the fact that Bowie was there, because I think she feels that Bowie stole some of her shtick too. I think everybody stole her shtick. But it was so wonderful, to have our heroes come and like it and get it. And, and then we're making a soundtrack that Atlantic wanted to be very, be big. So they were spending a lot of money on it. And Amit Erdogan came with his wife and said that was the best performance I've ever seen in my life. I don't know if he was lying. If he says that to everybody over the last 50 years.
It's like, what about Aretha Franklin?
I know. Yeah. What about Al Green? So we were getting a lot of attention. I was old enough to deal with it because as Barry told me, it comes and goes. I was level-headed about it. And then when it was 98, so there was a lot of small film companies. Every, major had a specialty house. And so Artisan and New Line and, everybody is sniffing around us. And we had the connection with New Line. And Mike DeLuca was like, I really want to make this. And Bob came and was like, tears in his eyes, we're going to do this. You're going to direct. I didn't even know if I wanted to direct or could. I was like, maybe I should co-direct.
Okay, so we should probably jump in here to explain a bit how it went from the stage to the screen. So the Bob that he's referring to is Bob Shea, who was the head of New Line. Mm-hmm. They had a relationship before because Bob had him come in to read for this movie, and John was very honest with him and told him to his face that he thought the character that he was reading for was written very homophobic fashion. And Bob was taken aback. He'd never sort of been spoken to that honestly before, and they developed a relationship. And when the question of whether Hedwig could make the leap to the screen happened, Bob kind of stepped up and said, I want to make this movie. Right.
And he apparently paid a lot of attention to the production and everything, even though he was doing Lord of the Rings at the time.
Right. Yeah.
So,
and John...
Two different worlds, fantasy worlds, Hedwig versus hobbits.
But they collided at these weird holiday parties that New Line were throwing that year. Can you imagine? The cast of Lord of the Rings at the same nog table with the cast of Hedwig.
Ian McKellen wistfully wanting to be in Hedwig. I could play Hedwig.
Trying on the wig. I'm sure that actually happened. It was a modest hit, as John points out, more of a cult theatrical hit than a Wicked type mega hit. Not necessarily a no-brainer to turn into a movie, but with Bob's pull, it became a movie. And they, the play takes place all in one restaurant. The movie, expands it out a bit, and you get to meet this Tommy Gnosis pop star character, which you don't ever get to see him in any great way in the stage play. And they add Andrea Martin to the cast
from SCTV and
who was
Broadway everything.
He had another actress in mind for that part.
He envisioned Madeline Kahn, and she became a friend of his, which that's crazy. But she was sick at the time, and that he also said that they auditioned Elaine May, but she didn't really get it.
John has a lot of important sort of diva friends.
Yeah.
Because on this podcast that he's doing, he has
Patti
LuPone, Glenn Close,
what?
Cynthia Erivo,
Laurie Anderson. It's not really a diva, but a performance artist legend.
But these major female art figures are, I guess, on his Rolodex. And anyway, so the movie came out in 2001. Specifically, it came out in July 2001.
Oh, great timing.
So not the greatest timing considering 9/11 happened, but not as bad as Glitter, which came out the same weekend as 9/11.
It did?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
So not the greatest time for a movie about walls coming down to hit theaters, and the movie was a bit of a bust. It only made $3 million. But that's so besides the point.
Right. It probably made that money back, and video rentals were still big then.
It's a good reminder that stop being so concerned about what a movie makes on its opening weekend. But let's get back to the making of the movie. So Bob Shea, friend of John's, wants to make this movie, wants John to direct it, even though he's never directed anything in his life.
Right.
Let's get back into the story of how the movie came together.
Were there other people that were interested in directing?
There were. I think Tim Burton wanted to do it. Forrest Whitaker really wanted to direct it. I said, Forrest, I didn't know him. Can I call you for it? I didn't know what Forest for the Trees. I said, I want to direct it. You said, John, that would be a terrible mistake.
Oh my God.
I was like, why? I was like, that's so mean.
Oh my God.
But, I had never done anything. I directed on stage. And it was the Sundance Lab. Michelle Satter invited me to go to the screenwriter and the filmmakers lab. So I did some scenes.
Oh, okay.
And it was her idea to have me directed by someone else and then direct myself in the same scene. So I brought Tom Kalin and he directed me, and then I directed myself in the same scene. And I was bored when I wasn't directing. So I realized I could do it. And the DP they gave me there, Frank DeMarco, ended up becoming my DP. I had Ariane Phillips and Therese Dupre, rest in peace, and just a great group of people who were experienced. Christine Vachon, Katie Rommel produced, And I worshipped, Killer Films and Todd Haynes and Gus Van Sant were heroes, and they both were very supportive. Todd was working on Velvet Goldmine, asked me to play a role. I couldn't because I was doing this. So it was all very exciting, and it was 2000. And
Gen X.
What's it like,
Yeah.
say, like your first day on the set? I mean, are you overwhelmed?
I was pretty
or-
nervous. I mean, the thing that I'm most confident now, which is directing actors, even then I was like, do I know what the right thing to say is? And then I just remember what I want to hear from a director. And I was much more interested in directing them than doing the role again, because I'd been doing it for a year. And it's like, I don't need to do this, but I had to. No one else could do it. So I would be running around in a wig, setting up shots, and then forget that I would have to be singing a song now or live, And it was the hardest thing I will ever do. And we had a crew that was used to TV movies and not doing this much, but we had it was so punk rock, I'd send the editor, go shoot that insert, Frank, do this. I don't have time to do my ass shot for this. Get the key grip, son, use his ass. Move those trucks and fix this wig, and it was...
Wait, that's the Key Grip's ass walking down the alley?
No, that's my ass, but there's a scene where he meets Sergeant Luther and he's lying naked.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
not
where
my
you...
ass.
Well, your ass looks good in the
lady.
alley.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's all that matters about the legacy of the film.
Yes,
Does my ass
true.
look good forever?
Does this aspect ratio make my ass look
good.
big? We shot different formats as tests and realized, 35, and it was great. But it was so hard, and I had to, check playback a lot, and it was just like the most stress I've ever experienced in my life. But afterwards, that it'll never be that bad again. And we made something very special. It was just painful to make it. I don't think I could do it now, everything I did then, just physically. But, yeah, you just do it. And, I mean, we were having fun. It was the stress fun. And I was surrounded by so many great people that cared, and there was no interference, from studio pain or anything. And Bob, when he saw the director's cut, he was in tears, and he really just suggested one change. So I was given final cut for my first film without any warning.
So he gets final cut of this movie that's very innovative at the time. You're talking about a movie in 2001 that's about a drag performer.
Yeah, if only Hedwig had gotten final cut. Maybe,
Right?
Maybe he wouldn't have that angry inch.
To have a pleasant foot. So it's interesting that how ahead of the curve this character was, because now drag is everywhere.
Yeah, RuPaul's Drag Race, you can't get away from it. It's totally exploded and gone mainstream.
Right, everybody watches it.
And I've interviewed RuPaul and other drag queens, and they always talk about it like putting on a superhero costume and making you this invincible, superhuman creature. And I think that's a bit about what Hedwig is for him, but he also refers to drag as armor. In the show itself, he takes the whole costume off and sort of stands there, not completely naked, but pretty close to it in his underwear. And I think that's as important as putting on the wig and the makeup and all that.
Right, just being yourself. This is you.
Everybody who gets Hedwig knows that there's many layers of that, which is why it isn't, a trans statement. Why it isn't. It's a theater statement.
Mm-hmm.
It's a statement for masks that are useful at times to protect us, but also let us express. In the end, Hedwig removes the drag, rips it off, in fact, in frustration, and then has a vision of an apology from her lover who she's been embittered by, and then sings Midnight Radio as perhaps a kind of amalgam of all the people, and the drag is gone, and it's just, I'm whatever you say, I'm Hedwig.
Love, give, free. Know your soul, like your blood knows the way, from your heart to your brain. that you're, then you're shining like the brightest star, a transmission on the midnight radio.
You know, Hedwig now would be a non-binary adjunct professor in the Midwest, you know, teaching Kant and Bowie, and happy that they have health insurance. You know, it's like, and that's it, and having let go of, you know, the armor of the drag. But we all need that armor at some time. It's a beautiful thing. You know, people who like it get that they can put the wig on whoever they are. Anyone plays. The most punk rock moment I ever experienced was seeing Iggy Pop at Jones Beach screaming to the audience, "I am you." I'm you. And then going into the audience, I'm you. There's no boundary here. I'm not God. I can be a shaman to get us there, but I am you. And Hedwig is you. Hedwig is the audience. Everybody's Hedwig. And if you choose to be, you know, and I love when people do it. I think any gender, race, any age can play it. It's a mask. In San Francisco, 10 people played it because there were 10 songs. You know, in Brazil, it was 2 people who, you know, was perfect. And Korea and Japan, it's a perennial production that, you know, Korea's been running for 15 years.
Wow.
And I go there and I'm a rock star. And K-pop bands come because they love Hedwig. And it's very weird, but it translates to a lot of cultures. And it's not queer there. It's not anything. It's just what it is. You know, it's what they make it and what they feel. That's all it is. It doesn't have an agenda.
Well, there you go. Everyone out there is Hedwig, and you're Hedwig, and you're Hedwig, but no one will be a better Hedwig than this week's guest, John Cameron Mitchell.
Yes.
What a genius.
Amazing.
I loved hearing him talk. I loved meeting him.
He's amazing. Just an artist who follows his own path.
I loved when you forced him to do the Snapchat gender flipper.
He was so gracious. He
Yeah.
posted that on his Instagram, so he wasn't.
Did he?
Yeah, so he wasn't frightened by the whole thing.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. It didn't look.
He got it.
It didn't look like Hedwig. It
No.
looked like a secretary in the Midwest.
Right, and that's a line in one of the songs, right? What's the line in one of the songs when he's wig in a box? He's putting on the wigs, and he's Miss Midwest Trailer Park. I can't remember the actual line.
Right, exactly. That's what the Snapchat filter did. But anyway, thank you, and listen to his amazing new podcast. It's called Anthem Homunculus, and it's on the
Luminary.
new Luminary podcast app. It's well worth getting a subscription to listen to him. It has songs, it has big stars, and it's really, if you know that it's his biography, it really is quite moving. So
He
thank you.
turns tragedies into entertainment.
So talented. Speaking of turning tragedy into entertainment, can you
This
believe
podcast?
we're at the end of the first season? What a journey. Thanks for
What the
coming
heck?
along with us. We had so much fun. This was an amazing adventure, Chip. I hope you had as much fun as I did.
I totally did. Probably more.
One person we never get to hear from, but we have to thank, is Matthew Whitehurst,
Yeah.
our long-suffering, hard-working genius behind the decks who makes it all come together. Thank you, Matthew.
Matty White's
We love you.
behind the decks on the ones and twos.
Thanks
The
again
podcast ones and twos.
to Paul Masvidal and Sean Malone of the band Cynic for our insanely catchy theme song. Thanks to Matt Bellany, the editorial director of Hollywood Reporter, who said yes to this crazy idea.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks to all the other podcasts at THR, to Scott Feinberg's Awards Chatter, which is the 800-pound podcast gorilla around here, and to Leslie Goldberg and Dan Feinberg's TV Top 5, to Karen Giardina's Behind the Screen. They're all awesome. You should listen to all of them. It's been an amazing adventure. We're going to take a little hiatus, but we will be back with 10 more amazing stories. And Chip has something he wants to share.
Well, I have something that I want you to share,
What?
which is what happened after we interviewed William Friedkin. It's my favorite story.
Okay, well, this is how I knew we had a hit on our hands. So William Friedkin came up here and told us the best stories ever about the making of The Exorcist. It was our pilot episode. We didn't know what to expect, and it was a huge breath of relief. And then I took him downstairs to his awaiting car, and I found a $5 bill on the ground. Good luck, right?
Yeah.
I said, hey, a $5 bill. And I bent down, and he snatched it out of my hands, and he said, "That's my fee." And he took it. But he was worth it.
Yes. I hope he's telling that story on other podcasts. It would be great for their podcast. And I said, "That's my fee."
Anyway, it's been an amazing, fun time. And until next time, we will see you in Hollywood.